This Choircast podcast brought to you by Bros, Bibles, and Beer. You know the conversations that you have with the guys, you have the debates, things go sideways, and then you end up laughing so hard it hurts?
Yeah, now imagine those conversations with actually digging into the big questions.
Zach, do you even like the Bible?
I do, Andy. I just am not sure if God wrote it.
That's blasphemy of the Holy Spirit.
How many beers have you had?
Bros, Bibles, and Beer. Serious conversations on faith and culture without taking ourselves too seriously. New episodes every week.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat. I'm with my brother John and our lovely co-host Bethany as always. And this is the podcast we have called This Is Not Church. Because if it was church, you would have left by now. And John, why are you staring at me like that?
I'm just listening.
You are legit staring intently into my camera and then deeply into my soul. And I am uncomfortable.
Sorry, I apologize.
Fine, I forgot. I went through that so fast. I forgot to say hi, John.
Hi, John.
Do whatever the hell you want, Bethany.
Whatever the hell I want, Bethany.
Oh, yeah, that's the closest you've gotten to following instructions since we started. And it was just throwing me like a virtual middle finger. That's amazing.
Yep.
I love it.
I gave you carte blanche to do whatever you want, and you were like, yeah, whatever I want. All right. I wish this was a video podcast sometimes, because Bethany is she's just like giving me a side eye. She's like sort of lounging in her chair. She's got this general F-you sort of attitude rolling. I actually dig it. It's very cool.
Okay, cool.
She's a parent of teenagers, so some of that stuff must rub off. So.
Oh my gosh, they are a lot.
I remember. I'm trying to forget, but anyway, welcome to the podcast. We're glad that you guys are here. Hopefully you clicked the link on purpose and you weren't misled by somebody. If you were, stick around. It's going to get pretty cool. We are here with another awesome guest. As always, we always have the best people on. Trump has the best people? No, sir. We have the best people.
Yeah.
Really tremendous. Really. I mean, they're just tremendous people. At the risk of turning this whole thing into a joke, let me get started. Reverend Elizabeth Ashman. Did I say that right? Is it Ashman?
Yes.
Okay.
Ashman Riley.
Ashman Riley. Okay. I almost always double check pronunciations, and then I'm like, ooh, for all I know, it's Ashman.
Ashman. That's more prestigious.
Yes.
I like it.
Oh, Elizabeth Ashman Riley.
Because I'm really British.
That's amazing. Your accent, you've almost lost it entirely. That's great. I love it. She's an Episcopal priest in Washington, fostering a diverse community both in person and through her vibrant TikTok presence, where she connects with over 60,000 followers from various backgrounds. An alumna of St. Mary's College of California, she has a Master's of Divinity from the Church Divinity School of the Pacific in Berkeley. Riley's notable roles have included serving as rector of Emmanuel Episcopal on Mercer Island. Prior to that, she was a deacon at St. Luke's Episcopal Church and associate rector at Trinity Church, both in California. She has been a steadfast board member for organizations like Young Clergy Women International and Stanford's Episcopal Campus Ministry, focusing on fundraising and development initiatives. In 2022, her sermonizing acumen, I like the way that was worded, her sermonizing acumen earned her the Diocesan Preaching Award, and I probably butchered that word. I know what a diocese is. Say that again.
Diocesan.
Yeah, I told you I butchered it. Diocesan? No. I have often heard that a symptom of the autodidact, which is what I would sort of label myself, like I read a lot, is a lot of times when you come across a word you've only ever seen, you ever read but never heard pronounced, you just go, I don't know, diocesan? And Diocesan Preaching Award. That was a rabbit trail that was wholly unnecessary. But she resides just outside of Seattle, where she's raising her 3 children. She has a new book out, and the title alone should make you run. Honestly, this is one of the best titles of a book I've seen in a while. She should run just for the title alone. It's called Rage Prayers, which, if I have to be honest, are the only kinds of prayers currently in my arsenal. I have rage prayers at this point. But without any further ado, welcome to the program. Elizabeth, how are you?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me. This is exactly the sort of place I want to be talking about rage prayers.
Yeah, because John and I are full of rage. Bethany's not. She still has all this hope and optimism, and not the toxic kind, but good optimism. She has all this, positivity.
It can be a little toxic. It can be a little toxic sometimes. I recognize that in myself.
But John and I are, 50 plus, year old,
Curmudgeons.
cisgendered white curmudgeons who are just left with, adult children and rage and mountains of debt. So that's not entirely true. But hey, just as a way of kicking off the show, we like to ask a question. We just sort of like to get to know people a little bit. And one good way to do that is to ask you about your faith background, kind of a little bit of your journey, how you ended up where you're sitting in front of me with a priest collar on, looking amazing.
Thank you. I know. I served in the Bay Area for 13 years, and I walked into a coffee shop one day in my collar, and the barista was like, "I love your necklace."
Oh no!
I mean, it's a good accessory, and sure. I'm not sure who would choose this as their necklace, but there you go. Yeah, I am an Episcopal priest, which is a role I've been in for quite some time now. I was ordained to the priesthood in 2013, so I've been ordained for over 10 years. I was born and raised in Alaska. That is home to me. And my parents, I'm technically from Wasilla. We can talk Wasilla and Alaska in another story, but they were not religious. They'd both sort of abandoned religion. And then through their own journey and getting divorced and doing, their own recovery work, my dad was deeply involved in the 12 steps. They found their higher powers and wanted my sister and me to have that experience, but in sort of the hippie liberal way that they did in the 80s in Wasilla, Alaska, which they felt really intensely that we needed some aspect of spirituality in our lives. My mom started going to Catholic church again. That's what she'd been raised in. And my dad had sort of abandoned Christianity, which was his mother's religion, but his dad had been Jewish, even though he and his siblings hadn't been raised that way. And so he started going to temple. And so my sister and I started going to Catholic church with mom and temple with dad. And we ended up having this lovely little interfaith family. I was 7 when I asked to be baptized. And my sister said she felt like she was Jewish. And so in this, quirky way, we built this really beautiful thing. I think that was really foundationally built with, my parents doing their own work and seeking out their own higher power and their sort of acceptance and tolerance. And that got more complicated in our relationship with the Catholic Church. My mom ended up not being allowed to take communion after she got divorced and remarried and all the things. And so I was at the point where, if you know anything about the Catholic Church, in like second grade, you go through your first communion preparation and all of that. And so I did first communion prep. And they really instilled in me the importance of communion. And I learned that my mom couldn't take communion anymore. And apparently I insisted to her. She said she was fine and we could stay. And I insisted that we had to leave to find a church where she could take communion. And I just giggled to myself that the Catholic Church did such a good job of teaching me the importance of the sacrament, but not that it needed to be taken at a Catholic church. And so I was like, great, let's just find somewhere else to go. And so we church shopped for a long time. And it was when I went with a friend. I slept over at her house and went to church with her in the morning and discovered the Episcopal Church and absolutely fell in love. It was this really special community in Anchorage, St. Mary's Episcopal Church, and they are still are such a lovely, accepting, beautiful little slice of humanity, an incredibly progressive church, very social justice focused. And that all felt really new and exciting for me in the midst of Christianity. It was also around the time that the Episcopal Church was starting to debate gay rights. So in 2003, the Episcopal Church ordained their first openly gay bishop, Gene Robinson. And around this time, I was elected as a delegate to our diocesan convention, where we were making decisions about our own polity and practices in the church. And the Episcopal Church went through a really difficult season of congregations leaving, dioceses leaving, people feeling really split over this issue. And Alaska was no different. There was a lot of dissent and difference of opinions of what the path forward should be. And I was at 15, 16, very passionate about gay rights and supporting queer acceptance within the church. It seemed to make the only sense in the world to me. And to find a church and a practice where we could spend the day debating all of this as a church, right? Debating gay rights, debating the right way to interpret scripture, and we could still find ways to come together and pray at the end of the day. This beautiful service of Compline where people who had just felt deeply divided could still pray. And that sense of something that was big enough for our differences and wasn't forcing us to all get on the same page at the same time, but was also this branch of advocacy for justice, was so powerful to me. I ended up going to my priest the next day and said, I think I want to do this. And so at 15, I told them I wanted to be a priest. And that was a really long story to get to. I ended up being ordained to the diaconate when I was 24. And so the path of advocating for justice and also the importance of our interfaith work and relationship within all of this has been a really big underpinning to the work that I do and how I show up in my ministry and my faith, because I don't think a lot of people have experienced a Christianity that is one that's fighting for justice. I don't think many people experience a Christianity that is loving or accepting. And so being a voice for that has given me a lot of purpose and passion in what I do.
I mean, I've long admired the Episcopal Church. And I wonder, I don't want to turn this into a treatise on the Episcopal Church, but I have wondered oftentimes, how is it that the Episcopal Church is always so far out front in so many of these issues? I mean, I know there has to have been struggle and try. It sure did not come as easy as it looks from the outside looking in, but they seem rather quick to make change.
I would say we could get quicker at it, and I love my church. I love the Episcopal Church, but, it's wild to me that even though we've had that conversation, right, around gay rights, and we are a denomination that is open, accepting, affirming, it doesn't mean every Episcopal congregation has done the work there. And so that's where it gets really tricky, where, I've served places where we aren't ready to put a rainbow flag outside yet. And that's hard for me, where the denomination feels like we're one place, but we still have so much work to do and to meet people where they are. And that gets trickier. But I think it's forced by people being loud, saying we are part of this church, but this is who we are and what we believe. And it has come with a lot of pain and struggle and fight. We could certainly, we a whole treatise on the Episcopal Church.
Oh, for sure. But I've watched this issue split other mainline denominations, as the United Methodist Church is currently undergoing. We have two Presbyterian churches, at least two. One is very, very liberal. They do fly a rainbow flag out front. And in West Texas, that's a brave ass thing to do. And then there's the other, which is more traditional, more conservative. But it is I don't know. It's an interesting thing to me just to sort of watch that play out. We used to, in my more evangelical days, the Episcopal Church was the butt of many of our stupid jokes. We're like, because we didn't know, we saw y'all, out front running with the rainbow flag, and we're like, oh, look at those people compromising the gospel. And now I'm going, God, I was an asshole. But I'm appreciative of that branch of Christianity that does offer me some hope that slowly but surely, or at least in a small quarter of the world, there are people who are risking a lot, I think, to advocate and to affirm and to defend the marginalized among us. And so that's going to be way more important even in the next 4 years.
But we're a well-kept secret, right?
Yeah, sure.
Going back to how do you pronounce things, I always joke with Episcopal clergy, like, we're not as well known as you think. When Google Maps still calls us like the Episcopal. Now giving directions to St. John's Episcopal. It's just like,
we used to just call you Catholic Light, is all we did. And then,
I mean,
I realized, of course, in the UK, it's the Anglican Church, right? It's still
the Church of England.
The Church of England. Anyway, it has a long and proud history. But let's talk about rage prayers, because first of all, I wasn't just blowing smoke. I love that title so much. I wrote at some point in my book or I don't know, it all sort of blends together. But I do remember writing in a particular part of my life, that was the only prayer I could muster. And I know that's not exactly. I mean, there's variations on that theme throughout the book, but there does come a time when it seems like that's all that's left to voice is lament or discontent, and it's something that the evangelical church, and I pick on them because I am them. So so there's no malice there. It's just it's my tribe, and that's the one I feel most qualified to critique. We suck at that. I don't know if we invented, but we certainly cornered the market on toxic positivity.
You all have given us some excellent examples of toxic positivity.
Absolutely.
But every mainline Christian church has had seasons of that, right?
Yeah.
So, we have been part of, and there are parts of the happy clappy Jesus movement that's great. Don't get me wrong, like, positivity has its,
yeah.
But so rage prayers came out of sharing my ministry on social media, just tying in that end to, the hidden secret of the Episcopal Church is I have felt passionately that we need to be talking outside of our sanctuaries on Sunday mornings, because we preach to the 10 people there and there's this whole other world out there. And so sharing on social media and doing TikTok has just been this huge life-giving thing. And I ended up with this song that was going viral, making a little joke about not being happy about every part of life and, not wanting to find the silver lining, and let's rage pray instead. And it sparked with people. It was like, oh yeah, I've done that. It gave a name to something that wasn't new, but felt like a name that a lot of us were seeking. And on a very personal level, a week later, my marriage ended. And so I ended up sort of inventing and doing rage prayers along the process of getting divorced and dissolving this huge part of my life. And it became this life-sustaining practice. That's, it's actually a reconnection with, I think, our Christian practices. So this is, while our denominations are bad at this, it's throughout Scripture, right? Like, lament is there in the Psalms and Job, and Jesus laments on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? And yet our very American Christian denominations have sanitized all of our practices because we don't talk about messy feelings, right? And there's been this push, I think, especially around obedience, that makes rage feel, or inviting people to rage has never felt safe for the established church. And obedience has its place, but a lot of us, especially Bethany, I'm sure you've had this experience as a woman, are taught that we need to be obedient in our faith, and rage doesn't always go along with that very well.
Yeah, definitely. The whole lasting charm of a gentle and quiet spirit doesn't really resonate in the same way when we are feeling the angst and rage and anger of grief coursing through our bodies. But I'm also a minister of the United Methodist Church and a non-denominational church. And I always feel like Lent is the most appropriate time for people to practice that rageful prayer, those prayers of anger and lament and grief, and to strip away all the positivity and all the ways that we pad ourselves and try to make things feel safe. All the ways that we're trying to be careful and not to trigger anybody with the real feelings and the vulnerable feelings that we have. And so Lent, I feel like, is just such a good season for that within the life of the church. Have you ever tried to incorporate some of these rage prayers during your Lenten practices?
Ooh, I love that. Now you have my wheels turning around like a rage prayer, Stations of the Cross. Or,
yes.
Station one. This sucks. No. I'm in. Let's make it happen.
Where I've actually used a lot of rage prayers is Blue Christmas. I'm not sure if that's the service you've incorporated. But...
Yeah, we did a longest night service, Blue Christmas service this last couple weeks ago.
So, for people listening who might not know what that is, during Advent, there's so much, what I call the mandatory joy of the season, right? Like you're supposed to just be happy and love the twinkly lights and needing a place to grieve and to rage and to cry. And so I've definitely incorporated some of the rage prayer idea there and did a rage prayer service on TikTok for Blue Christmas as well, which was really fun. But now I've got to think about it for Lent. And where are those places? Because it seems like there are seasons we're allowed to rage and other seasons where we're not. I talk a lot through the book about my dad dying. He died of pancreatic cancer 10 days before I was ordained to the priesthood. And it was my first Easter as a priest. And it was right after Easter services. I had to get on a plane to fly to Panama City, Florida to go spread his ashes. And the disconnect of an Easter Sunday resurrection service with my dad's ashes sitting in my suitcase. And there's only one moment where we get to have grief during Easter Sunday. There's one line, at least in the Episcopal service, during the prayers of the people where we pray for the dead. And it was just, give to the departed eternal rest and may light perpetual shine upon them. And I needed so much more grief. Yay, Jesus. But I had such a big unmet need that day. And so how do we bring that into more than just Lent or just Blue Christmas, these very safe containers?
Well, Nat and I are, Bethany, I believe as well, raised in evangelical churches, were told that this is not acceptable. Right. How many times have any of us said that when asked how we're doing, we just say we're fine?
Sure.
Because to acknowledge pain and rage was to acknowledge that side of you which was not holy. And it made us bottle down and push down until I can't remember, it was someone else that we've talked to before who says that once you push this down, it has nothing but to come out sideways and without your control or not under your control. And I feel like what you're offering is not necessarily control, but a way that says it's okay to be angry. It's okay to say, "What the fuck, God?" as a prayer. And I think I don't know if that's, I know you say something similar to that.
Yeah. The prayer for cancer is, "Dear God, fuck cancer."
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I had a teacher once tell me FINE just stood for fucking insecure and negative emotion.
Oh, man. I like that. I'm stealing it.
Yeah, seriously.
But it's almost as though if we're in a bad mood, we're burdening other people in some way.
Yeah.
And so we have to deal with it ourselves.
Unfortunately, we've built a way around it that's the answer they want too.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Sure. How are you doing? That's not a question as to, let's delve into your psyche right now. That's how are you doing? I'm fine. So am I. Okay, can we move on?
Yeah, let's have the niceties and give the emotional experience that people expect. And I think people are scared too of, if I express my anger, will there ever be anything else? Or at least I know some of the big grief in my life, the big anger, my big fear started looking at the state of the world. It's like, can there be joy? Can there be hope? Will I get lost in that anger, get lost in that grief? And I really deeply believe that, rage prayers and the idea of practicing anger or any full emotion in our prayers is not so that we get lost in it, but as a part of how we process it and learn from it and see, how many times has our world been changed for the better when we have fought against injustice because we've been so angry that we cannot let this injustice stand. So I think rage can fuel goodness too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the weird thing was I spent quite a few years in a particular branch of the evangelical church called the Word of Faith movement. So you might call it the prosperity gospel. The name it and claim it dudes. It was borderline nothing. It was blasphemous to admit anything was going wrong in your life because your negative utterances would give life to negative things. So essentially you had the power of your words to make things go well. So the catchphrase was always, "Oh, watch your confession." Oh, don't confess that over me. Oh, you better watch your confession, man. I'd be like, man, I'm like, things are going really shitty. I have cancer. Oh, no, you don't. You're healed in the name of Jesus. And it's like, it gets deeply, and I'm still working it out. It gets deeply ingrained into you to the point where it's shiny, happy people all the time. You walk around with these bullshit masks over everyone's faces. Everyone's in pain. We know they are because that's the human condition. Everyone's got a certain level of suffering going on in their lives. Everyone. And yet they're forced to walk around with these Stepford Wives looks on their faces and saying things like they're blessed and highly favored of the Lord when it feels like the Lord is kicking the shit out of you. I was sitting in a hospital with my daughter as she was close to dying. And that was the moment when I'm like, fuck this. And I rage prayed. I now know what I called it. I mean, that was and they were guttural, almost in groans of just like, I don't understand. Like, this sucks. I've been a good guy, man. I've been serving God. I've been serving the church. I've been doing all the things I'm supposed to do. This wasn't supposed to happen. And it was cathartic. I will say that. There was, and especially when I wasn't struck by lightning immediately. And I found out, and again, that was sort of the beginning of the end of my, of that sort of religious mindset. But that, to me, that is the quintessential toxic positivity. When you're not just encouraged to say everything's great. No, you're discouraged from ever admitting things are going that things aren't well. And meanwhile, everything in your life could be going, Tango Foxtrot, that's it. It's Tango uniform. Anyway, I'll explain that later. But you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? That's why I love this idea. So go ahead.
And that just becomes a breeding ground for abuse and corruption. Yeah. So much toxic life. But it's not just I don't want to say like that just exists within the evangelical church.
No, for sure.
Christianity has really struggled, and so much of that because I think have been, as I know I have felt this as a Christian leader, trying to get people to stay with the church as we slowly die and lose members and all these things. And so you're trying to create and build up this way of living and being that keeps people engaged and connected. And if people can just get pissed off at God and walk away, will our church survive? There's a lot of fear that I think pushes church leaders and religious leaders to keep people positive.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the reasons they get pissed off and walk away is there's no one in the church who's willing to step up and say, that's okay. What you're feeling is all right. And so for people to have people like you who say, yeah, not only is it okay, I think sometimes it's mandatory to talk like this. And I think that's what we need.
Yeah. And we haven't created opportunities for people to really share how they're feeling as well. And so regardless of the church, but in life in general, we tend to say that we're fine because we don't want to be a burden to anyone. We don't want to place our needs on somebody else or expect them to fix it for us. And so it's easier just to keep it in because we don't want to be somebody that is taking too much from another person. And instead, what I see through your book and your writings and these rage prayers, I see this picture of sharing exactly what's happening within without the expectation of being fixed. It's more just, I am dying here and I need you to hold this with me. We had somebody speak at our church on Sunday, and he was somebody who was held hostage prisoner by Al Qaeda for 6.5 years. And he said something so poignant. He said, people captured me, and people advocated for me, and people got me out. Like, God didn't capture me. God didn't get me out, but God got me through it. And I think that that's the picture of the rage prayer. It's as much as we'd love to escape the pain and the grief and try to get to the other side as quickly as possible. Sometimes we just need people to stand beside us while we're going through it, that they're with us through it, just like God is with us through it. Not to fix it, not to make it perfect, but just to know we're not alone in it all. And I just saw that over and over again in your writing, that you're just like, I don't understand this. It doesn't make any sense. You know, all the prayers, like you prayed about the body, you prayed about spirituality, you prayed about the petty things, like all these different things that it's just, you were just making voice to the things saying, I need somebody with me through this. It was beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is, I think at the church when it's at its best, that is what a community is doing for you and with you, is being there when you're going to show up every Sunday in immense grief at the loss of your person. And that community is going to remember that, you know, for months and months, months. And the best parts of church have been people just letting me be and letting me continue to show up and be. And the worst parts are when people want to push you through it or rush you through it. And not let you feel it. And both things can exist within church communities.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said for just commiserating with somebody. And that was the thing that, you know, as I pastored for several years, planted a church once upon a time, and people were generally uncomfortable with and not well equipped to handle grief. And I get that. And so I try to have a lot of grace for people. And what I would, my only advice to people when they had asked me is like, well, if somebody's, you know, going through something, you don't know what to say, it's fine to say, man, I'm sorry, that sucks. Like, I don't need your advice at this point. I don't need platitudes. I don't need little cliches. Some of them are god awful. Don't tell me God needed another angel. Don't tell me God's in control. But there is something about being in solidarity and saying, you know, hey, man, that's terrible. You know, I'll sit with you in this grief. And there's a lot of that I think the church could benefit. And it's simple, right? But I think in our efforts to avoid the uncomfortable, we come out with the cliches. You know, let me cheer you up. Oh, you'll see them again someday. Oh, they must be having a party up in heaven. And I'm like, fuck off. I just want to be mad right now. Could you just let me have that?
The most freeing thing I did in recent years, you know, social media shows your memories, right? And so it always pops up with the memory of my dad's passing and the post I did about that. And I went and deleted all the platitudes.
Yeah.
I deleted every comment that pissed me off, even if it was from a family member, because it's just, no, I don't need it. I don't need your unresolved religious stuff in my life. Thank
Exactly,
you.
Right.
And I talk about in the book, you know, the arguing with my grandmother as my dad was dying, right? Because she kept saying, we just got to pray. And, you know, she's a nurse, or she was a nurse and a Christian. And she just wanted to pray the stage 4 pancreatic cancer away. And I also have to have immense sympathy for her to be losing a child and to have been given absolutely nothing else in her faith formation and from leaders in her life to give her a different theology than that. And that's what she had to cling to.
Yeah, I read through that chapter not too long ago, and that resonated with me a ton, because as pastors, as priests, as we've been around some death, and we've watched people go through this. I got called into a friend of mine whose mother had a brain aneurysm. She was dead. She was on life support, and there was a there was, a handful of family members gathered around her bed, and they were just going to pray her back to life. We were, but I walked out of the hospital room and I saw a doctor that I know, and he just sort of looked at me and I said, "I'm just here with the family." And he goes, "Well, just so you know, she's gone. It's this, we've kept her on life support so the family can come say goodbye." But there was no way for them. And again, I don't know the whole family that well, but it seemed to me there was no way to process that reality. So they had to invent another one where maybe God would come through in the clutch and just last minute, resurrect. But I also had the same thing happen at a funeral for another good friend of mine, where he was dead, embalmed in a coffin, open casket, and they kicked everyone out of the chapel for an hour while the family prayed for him to be resurrected. I mean, it was the most heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching, uncomfortable thing to sit outside the doors and listen to as they wailed and prayed and cried and screamed. And again, not being critical of that, I get grief. We deal with grief in different ways, all of us. But I did have to lament the fact that was what their theology had left them with, was the only hope was that Lazarus was going to come forth again. And no way to just process the fact that this was terrible and the 33-year-old guy shouldn't have been, should not have died. To me, that dovetails nicely with what you would talk about too about injustice then as well, because that's an unjust to me. I mean, the universe owes me nothing. I get it, but a young guy in his 30s shouldn't die of a heart attack. That seems objectively unjust. And so is there a place for that sort of rage against maybe even sort of cosmic injustice?
Right. And how do we put that? Because there's the really toxic, thoughts and prayers, right? Thoughts and prayers, more children dying in Gaza, thoughts and prayers. It's, so where does prayer have a place that's not just a platitude? And I think rage prayers at the core is about praying the truth of the matter. And that's meaning, the rage prayers I've often done around mass shootings and school shootings are praying about the sin of our love of guns and violence, and their confessions more than anything, because that's all I can do in that moment is turn to what sins can and should we be confessing, because if we name it, then we should. I mean, our country makes me want to pull my hair out, but it should force us to do something about it. It makes it that much harder to look away from it. Makes it that much harder to deny. And so not the thoughts and prayers of, we pray for everyone who's lost a loved one today, that they're just going to be okay and God will love them. But, we pray for our country's sinful love of violence and weapons. And that hopefully it makes us so uncomfortable that we won't and can't keep staying in this state of being and letting the world be as it is.
Well, it's harder still when you realize that so many of those people who advocate for all of those things are professing Christians. And I just, again, without at the risk of sounding judgmental, I want to say, what the fuck? Where do you get this in the Gospels? If the Bible's not a perfect book. There's some shit in there I don't like. But where you come away with any kind of violent ethic from the Gospels is beyond me. You have to do some pretty good mental gymnastics, I think. Go ahead.
I had a sermon go viral with the wrong people.
Oh, no.
My book came out. So it was my sermon on the Syrophoenician woman who, argues with Jesus, because Jesus basically calls her a dog,
right,
and says even the dog deserves the scraps. And so I preached a sermon where I said, I really don't like this look on Jesus. This whole thing, and it's more nuanced and this whatnot, but I really don't want to just apologize away Jesus, frankly, looking like an asshole or trying to use this woman as an example. And so this sermon went wrong on all the wrong sides of the internet. And the things people said about me and to me as Christians was just horrendous. I mean, disagree with my theology all you want, but the things people said they wish would happen to me was just really disgusting, and the rampant anti-Semitism that showed up.
Yeah.
So I do not blame anyone who says I can't get anywhere near Christianity because there are too many examples of it just being awful. But then we're also left with a whole swath of people who have just, I mean, you look at going through these major losses in life and the complexities of grief and the, scary state of the world. And when there isn't an underpinning or a spirituality or rituals to allow us to move through life. And I do think there's a group seeking something.
Yeah, I think so.
Certainly see that on social media.
Yeah.
But Christianity, they just don't want to get anywhere near. And I don't really blame them.
I don't either. And Brian McLaren's book, Do I Stay Christian, did a really good job of that, of identifying in the first half of the book, hey, these are the reasons why I don't blame you for getting the hell out. But here's the second half of the book that might compel you to find a reason to stay. But it's weird you bring up the Syrophoenician woman, because my best friend and former co-pastor, we were having dinner the other night, and that came up. Because what we were talking about was the notion of the church, the theology of Jesus as fully human and fully divine, does not fully human mean you can learn. It does not fully human mean you can be wrong. And wrong doesn't mean, so we're like, okay, if you really have to cling to a sinless Jesus, and at this point in my theology, I'm not sure how much I care about that. But if you need to, why do we equate being wrong with being sinful? Could not Jesus have just been wrong and did something unkind? And she called him on his bullshit, which I love that story for that reason. There's Jesus, and he responded correctly, I think. There was a recognition, I think. Now the gospel writers probably didn't want to make it. They probably prettied it up a little bit. So he looked even less like it. So maybe he was but I like the idea of a fully human Jesus going through life, being faced with the prejudices that he'd been given as a first century Jew, and having to come face to face with those. And at some point, maybe somebody bravely calling him on his bullshit and him going, oh, okay. I have not seen such great faith. Right? Like there's this whole thing of there's a recognition that what she said was true. And then she cleverly judoed him around it. I love it. But again, it goes back to that fundamental way that we look at Jesus, where we've amplified divinity and we've really tried to subdue his humanity. And I think it comes into play in this whole idea of rage prayers, because Jesus rage prayed. I was going to preach a sermon in a church. I was not the pastor. I was like a co-pastor, worship leader guy. And I was given an opportunity after much hand-wringing. That's a much longer story, but to preach a sermon. And the sermon I was going to preach was Jesus was afraid. And I was told in no uncertain terms I would not preach that message. No, Jesus was never afraid. Really, he sweat drops of blood. He was in mental anguish. He was in the garden praying and begging God to take this cup from him. Why do we equate fear with something sinful? Couldn't it have been that he's a human fucking being who was looking, staring down the barrel of a very painful and excruciating death, and a human reaction would have been to be like, oh hell no, this sucks. Like I don't want to do this. But let me ask you this, then. I guess all of that was leading up to a question, but sometimes I just don't have a question. Sometimes I feel like Michael Scott. Sometimes I just start a sentence and I don't know where it's going to go. Well, we just see what happens.
It's an adventure for all of us.
It really is. And you're welcome for that. But have we sanitized Jesus to the point where we've stripped him of his humanity in favor of a divine, miracle working, walking on water Jesus versus, a guy walking around with dirt on his feet? I'm just curious.
The institutional church has never really upheld Jesus as I think Jesus was, right? We like to sanitize and it's very Buddy Christ, right? Remember Dogma?
I do. I love that so much. I had that on my dashboard for so long.
Yeah, Jesus was messy, and Jesus ate with all the people we didn't think he should eat with, and he upset folks. And the biggest disappointment I had as a kid in Sunday school, in catechism, was learning that I thought when I heard that Jesus was fully human, that meant that he sinned and was imperfect, because I was learning that we were meant to be like Jesus. And so I had such a relief. I was like, oh, well, Jesus messed up too, so that means I can mess up. And then I found out that wasn't the case. And I was so disappointed because I was like, well, if Jesus was human and perfect, then like what hope is there for us? And so I absolutely love that idea that Jesus grew, Jesus learned. That's the example that we have to live up to. So, most churches would kick out Jesus if he walked in the door.
Yeah, if he got to the front door, they'd be like, hey, hold up, new carpet.
Right? And there are moments where I've wondered, it's like, man, it would be a lot easier to follow Jesus some days if I was willing to sort of just give up any claim to Christianity and stopped having to fight with, other denominations and other Christians about how we define Jesus. Just live like Jesus.
Well, one of the more freeing things that I have found since I'm not a Christian, I've left all of that. I can't do it. I have not left Jesus, but it's allowed me to do things that as an evangelical I was never allowed to do, which is like, hey, maybe you read what the scholars have to say about this Jesus person. Let's parse through the scriptures and find out how much of it is true and how much of it is propaganda, because there's little bits of both in there. Mm-hmm. And it has allowed me to redefine myself as I'm a follower of Jesus. I don't think there's anything in the Sermon on the Mount that I don't think is great, although no one wants to nail those on courtroom walls for some damn reason. We all love the 10 Commandments so much. But yeah, it's liberating, and that's not, I'm sure that's not I know it's not the path for everyone, but the path for me was to, at least temporarily, get away from the trappings, get away from the boxes of not just that they put Jesus in, but that the church likes to put me in, and say, okay, well, I don't have to play by your rules. I don't need your rewards. I don't need your threats. Me and Jesus will be just fine. Thank you very much. But it also has allowed me, I think, and I think that what you're getting at is to try and get a more holistic picture of Jesus. And I know that in the first couple centuries after Jesus' death and resurrection, there was lots of fighting about this. I mean, the reason we have an Orthodox and a Catholic Church is them fighting over the very substance of Jesus and how his humanity and his divinity play off one another. And so I understand it's a difficult topic, but it feels like where we've landed in the West, especially amongst a certain brand of Christians, is, any mention of Jesus's humanity that looks messy, we try to scrub. But I like the idea of him, because come on, man, where did we get the idea that screwing up is sin? Like I've made lots of mistakes that I would not call sin. They were I didn't know any better, and I did the best I could with what I had. And we have examples of apostles. I mean, Paul learned. I think Paul's theology evolved through the epistles. You can read that. Peter got called out for some of his crap. Go ahead.
All the disciples get called out. I mean, Thomas, as he's demanding to see the wounds, and as Jesus says, sure, here are the wounds, he's like, you could believe without seeing too. And so it's like Jesus meets his need and invites him to growth. So the disciples are they're just a group of mess ups.
Yeah.
Like, wait, they're the densest bunch. He just repeats himself over and over and over, and they're the ones who inherit it, right? Like, it gives me a whole lot of hope for the rest of us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and if you can lump Jesus in the mix, and I don't mean to monopolize this, but it's weird because this is really what we've been talking about quite a bit amongst my friends. But if you can lump Jesus in the mix of that too, and say, well, even Jesus wasn't born walking upright and speaking full sentences. He fell down. He wet his bed. He did all kinds of human things. He pissed his mother off, probably.
Oh my God, they're just talking back to as I raise a toddler.
Yeah.
Like,
tell me teenage Jesus wasn't a pain in the ass.
I mean, 12-year-old Jesus was running away and going to the temple. Like, right. I don't think the best choice of not telling your mother where you're going, how divine you are. So yeah, we've conflated the idea of sin and messing up. And so while we're talking a lot about Christianity here, I've really hoped that Rage Prayers is bigger than just Christianity.
Yeah, okay, for sure.
To keep it, ecumenical and open, because I think God speaks to people in a whole lot of different ways. I was raised in a household where the God that loved me loved my Jewish sister. And so that's foundational for me, is Jesus is the way for me, and God is so much bigger than just this, which I know is blasphemous to so many Christians to say. But it's the most honest thing that I know to be true of the God I've encountered.
Well, I was just going to bring up something I like about the book, and that's that I feel like there's no right way to read it.
Okay.
So, and what I mean by that is that what I did when I read it is I read all of your introductions without reading any of the prayers. I just wanted to hear what you had to say. And then I went back and I cherry picked and I went through and I read the ones that were interesting to me. I ended up reading most of them, but I really like the way the book is set up. And then and what you do though is you invite people to not only pray, to take these as gospel, but then to use these as a way to then speak your own truths and come up with your own rage prayers. And that's what I really like about it.
Yeah, I feel like it was almost anti-rage prayers to have to put these into like a lovely published edition that's meant to be like edited. And too often prayers, people think a prayer has to sound like poetry, right? Like this beautiful, lovely, flowery language thing. And rage prayers really should be like a messy piece of paper where like half of it's scraped off and like you cross these out and like, fuck this. And like, I didn't mean to say that. Like that's really what rage prayer should be. Yeah. It's messy and it can be ugly and it doesn't always sound good. How many people can't pray because they don't think they can say it right?
Yeah, right.
And so, obviously I had to put things into a version that could be published, but really wanting people to break out of this has to be poetry and put your own words in here. And so I'm glad that invitation came across.
Well, yeah, because that, especially when that was always like the most scary thing to me was being like a Bible study or a group of people and they're like, who wants to pray? And it's all of a sudden you've got to go, oh Lord, Heavenly Father, I beseech thee on behalf of my brethren. But I was watching, I wish I could remember where it was. I need to find the clip. There's a clip of this like recently saved, converted, former drug addicted, kind of rough guy. And he's on like Christian television and they invite him to pray. And it's the best because they're like, you need to curse the devil. He's like, all right, fuck you, Satan. Fuck you. But to their credit, the two sort of, I think it was the one with like the lady with the really wild purple hair, not Kat Kerr. She's crazy. I can't remember her name. Anyway, they just kind of went, oh dear. Oh, okay. And, like, we understand the sentiment, son, but it was a very honest, hey, you told me to curse the devil, I'm cursing him. Fuck that guy. But yeah, that prayer has to be, stylized in a certain way. And we used to mock my pastor all the time because he always repeated, it's almost like a shibboleth. He had to say like every third or fourth word was Heavenly Father. Oh, no, Heavenly Father. Oh, no. Like, do you talk to anyone else like that? Come on.
And we all of us who have served have done this, right? Like you have your go-to phrases and your little, like, if you blink in the middle of the prayer, your little catchphrase you're going to go to until you think of what else you should be saying. There.
Now, so if you're charismatic, you have the added bonus of just being able to make words up. And then so you're like, Lord, shamalama ding dong, wagga wah, walla walla bing bang. Anyway, so I never could get on board with that.
Like, shit, I forgot what I was saying. The prayer.
Like, what are you saying? I don't understand. But I love, so if nothing else, then something a book like this can help us accomplish then too is to find a way of prayer or a vehicle by which to pray that is more honest and more sincere and more genuinely us rather than kind of putting on airs. And I think that's fantastic. I just love it.
It's really beautiful. It reminds me a lot of, it has the potential to be helpful, like a book of common prayer. Yeah. When I was reading through some of the prayers, I was like, oh, I would use that at a funeral, or I would use that at a wedding, or I would use that in a church service when we're working through a specific area of scripture. And it's so accessible, which is beautiful. I think like what I keep recognizing just throughout this conversation and throughout your book is that it like brings us back to Christ, but in a way that brings a mirror to us. And so sometimes it's easy for us to like be critical of certain other paths of Christianity or certain other paths of faith. But I feel like these prayers actually confront us with where we're at and invites us to be more honest with how we're actually feeling in ourselves instead of pointing out how other people are going wrong, or if they only got their act together, or if they were only more honest, or they seem like they're fake. Instead, it's just like, where am I feeling fake? Where am I trying to put the best face forward? And what is God inviting me into? I mean, even the conversation we had with the Syrophoenician woman just now, it's so easy. And I think this is where Jesus was too. It's so easy to become a product of our culture, to be influenced by the culture around us, whether it is a faith-based culture or a secular culture, a political culture. And I think Jesus was influenced by his culture, one that said that these people belong and these people don't. And these sorts of prayers help confront the ways that we are so immersed in one way of thinking and saying, no, there is more inclusion here that we get to learn from and grow from. And I just really, I don't know, I appreciate it. I feel like it's a mirror. It's a beautiful mirror.
I think that's such a beautiful point to bring up, and a really important one as we go into the next 4 years of this political season. Not scapegoat into, everyone else's demons, but to stay rooted in our own possibilities and purpose and action rather than, it's easy. And we need to sometimes complain about what other people are doing that are driving us crazy. I mean, the last chapter of that book is petty rage, but at the heart of our anger is also, where can we turn? Where can we make a difference from where we are?
Well, and just to put a little cherry on top, if you've made it this far and you're still listening, I hope you are. I can't imagine you would have turned off. This is compelling stuff. Yeah. Not the commentary, but our guest mostly. But this would make a really good, small group study book. I would love to see someone go through this. I would love to go through this with 6 or 8 of my good friends. And let's just, and because I can imagine, I'm already imagining the kinds of conversations that would come up. Yeah. And the kinds of life-giving conversations that would come up where people might finally feel comfortable talking about some of the stuff that they've been pushing down for a while. There's my buddy Todd that I mentioned, that we were talking about, the Syrophoenician woman going through hell right now, a brother with stage 4 cancer, and mom just died. There's stuff going on, but he's a macho dude and doesn't talk about that stuff. So when I ask him how he is, he's fine. But if I had this book and we were talking about it, I bet I'd get something out of him. I bet there would be a prompt to say, you actually know what? Things actually kind of suck right now. I might need one of these rage prayers right about now. In fact, I think I'm going to buy a copy as a late Christmas gift for him. I think it'd be great. So if you're listening, and honestly, I say this about a handful of books from time to time. This is one I probably feel the most strongly about. That would be such a good thing to go through together with a family or a small group. So if you're inclined at all to buy a new book in 2025, which if you're like us, we're always inclined to buy new books. Maybe go buy 6 or 8 copies and schedule some time with your friends and check up on them. This will be also a good little covert way to check up on folks, I think. Ooh, that almost sounds like nefarious. I don't mean it that way, but
no, it's a little subversive. I was just thinking, back to the question of using this in Lent, I could see, practicing writing rage prayers through Lent and burning them through fire at the vigil. Anytime you can burn things, it's a great release, and letting go of some of those words. I know a friend doing campus ministry at UW, they used rage prayers after the election and had students come in and they wrote rage prayers and used it in that way. So lots of great ways to, I hope it's a jumping off point for others to say their own words.
Yeah. I do recall waking up the day after the election and yelling, my God, why have you forsaken me? But that was just more of a personal lament. But man, I tell you what, thank you so much, Elizabeth. I've enjoyed it. Yeah. I can't speak for those two. I've enjoyed it. I'm sure they have. I'm just kidding.
Elizabeth, I'm wondering if you would close us out with reading one of the prayers.
Sure.
Do you have a rage against podcasters?
No, y'all are my friends right now.
Oh, podcasts, bane of my existence. No, just kidding.
I would love to read, because I think some people are surprised to hear a priest read a prayer for an absent God, but I'd love to read the rage prayer for an absent God for those who might need those words to hear someone wearing a collar saying these things and knowing I have felt this. And so if you feel it, you are not alone. To the unanswering heavens, I shout. Despite not knowing the voice of comfort, so many others speak of hearing, despite my calls to you. For the divine to whom I have gone without introduction, a closeness I crave but is not realized, I pray. I have shouted words into the abyss, pleaded into the night, praised in the morning. In my need and in my despair, sought your wisdom at crossroads, but I do not hear your voice. I seek and do not find your steadfast presence. Holiness, if you are there, hear my prayer.
Wow.
Thank you all for having me.
Thanks for coming. All right. We'll link to all your stuff in the show notes, obviously, and we'll get, if you're not following Elizabeth on TikTok, get over there quickly and do that. And then
we still have TikTok.
What's that?
We still have TikTok for a few more
we
weeks.
still have it until, well, if not, don't worry. There'll be something else.
There will
Somebody will create some sort of underground rebel TikTok. Let's go. But I just appreciate it. Thank you so much. Amazing conversation, amazing book. And just wish you all the success. Hope 2025 is just awesome for you.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.